Welcome to ePathshala. I am Dr. Vishal Jadhav, Associate Professor, Department of Sociology, Tilak Maharashtra Vidyapeeth, Pune. Today, we are going to look at a module called Weber, Jainism, Marwaris and Entrepreneurship. This module comes under the paper Classical Sociological Theory. By now, we are quite familiar with Weber's idea on religion in India. His understanding of Buddhism, Hinduism and partly even Jainism has given us an understanding of how he views the value systems and the ethics as important constituents of social action. In his magnum opus, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, he explains how capitalism emerged in the West due to the religious practices and principles of Calvinism. In this module, we shall briefly look at how we can have a Weberian understanding of why the Marwadis are entrepreneurs and successful entrepreneurs at that. An overview of Jainism as religion. Jainism, like Buddhism, is usually depicted in the West as a heterodox rebellion against the Vedic and Brahmanical rituals. But with some justification, the Jains claim that both the belief system and Buddhism belong to an older Sramanic or striving tradition that predates what has come to be described as Hinduism. Although Buddhism's antipathy to Vedic traditions is unequivocal and its origin can be accurately dated, arguably Jainism is an incarnation of Eurasia's oldest extant religious tradition. The exemplary luminary for Jains is Mahavir, an older contemporary of the Buddha who is often described by non-Jains as the founder of Jainism. The Sramanic traditions emphasize renunciation and extreme austerities as the only means of salvation or moksha, that is liberation from samsara, the endless cycle of transmigration. During a famine in the 4th century BC, a number of Jain ascetics migrated from the faith's heartland in present-day Bihar to southern India, and this geographical shift by part of one unified religious community precipitated the later division of mendicants into two distinct traditions, the Digambars and the Shvetambars. The major point of contention between the Digambars, the sky-clad, and Shvetambars, that is the white-clad, largely revolves around whether ascetics should wear any form of clothing. The migration of southern India formed the nucleus of Digambar community that were and are largely agriculturalists concentrated in Deccan, the modern states of Maharashtra and Karnataka. The Shvetambars are mainly concentrated in Gujarat, Rajasthan, where they are for the most part involved in commerce, although there are a number of both sects scattered across India. For example, Kolkata has an important Jain mercantile community, and Jaipur is in Rajasthan has a large Digambar population also. Jain philosophy and doctrine. Non-violence. The Jains have laid great emphasis on ahimsa varata. The doctrine of ahimsa or non-violence is a cardinal principle of Jain religion. It is also so central in Jain faith that it may be called the beginning and the end of Jain religion. The first and foremost principle of Jain philosophy is ahimsa. Non-violence means not to kill or hurt any living being by the body, speech or mind. It is possible only for those persons who dedicate their whole life on the basis of Mahavratas and who have renounced their household life. First of all, one should shun all thoughts leading to Sankalpa Hinsa, the violence perpetrated by intention and activities premeditated coming to this mind out of attachment and aversion. The minor vow called Ahimsa Anuvrata, prescribed by Lord Mahavira, is an effective step in the direction of creating a healthy society. Non-possession. According to the Jains, a person perpetrates violence due to the desire of possession. It is the main requirement of life. A man cannot sustain his life without it. The cravings of more possessions makes people indulge in violence. The greed for money, land, etc. and craze for acquiring more things are the root causes of violence. So non-violence is secondary, whereas non-possession is the main principle of Jain philosophy. One cannot understand Mahavir's conception of non-violence until and unless he comprehends his principle of non-possession. Violence and acquisitionness go hand in hand. Anekantavad. Philosophically, an important contribution to Jainism is the doctrine of Anekantavad. The Jain thinkers thought that reality can be examined from anek, that is standpoints, anta. The things can be described from at least 7 standpoints, saptabhangi, and all can be equally true. This doctrine has contributed to the tolerance of contrary opinions among theologians and philosophers. In modern times, when exclusive claims of religion are under strain, this doctrine has a special relevance and meaning. The Jain doctrine of Anekantvad or non-absolutism, which is so relevant today if it is propagated properly, can solve many of the burning problems of modern times. Jain Dharma has the capacity to become Vishwa Dharma. Principles are certainly beneficial of humanity at large. The idea of God. Concept of God in Jainism, they believe that universe and all its substances or entities are eternal. It has no beginning or end with respect to time. Universe runs its own accord by its own cosmic law. All substances change or modify their forms continuously. Nothing can be destroyed or created in the universe. There is no need of someone to create or manage the affairs of the universe. Hence, Jainism does not believe in God as a creator, survivor, and destroyer of the universe. However, Jainism does believe in God not as creator but as a perfect being. When a person destroys all his karmas, he becomes a liberated soul. He resides in a perfect blissful state in moksha. He possesses infinite knowledge, infinite vision, infinite power, and infinite bliss. The living being is a god of Jain religion. Every living being has a potential to become God. Hence, Jains do not have one God, but Jain gods are innumerable and the number is continuously increasing as more living beings attain liberation. Jains believe that since the beginning of time, every living being, because of its ignorance, is attached with karma. The main purpose of the religion is to remove this karma through self-knowledge and become liberated soul. Jainism and capitalism. The Jains of India are a flourishing and prosperous community, but their religion is focused on the teaching and example of ascetic renouncers, whose austere regime is actually dedicated to ending worldly life and often culminates in fast to death. Particularly in northern India, the Jains have historically been associated with commerce, one of the number of business communities who have been designated Vaishya or Baniya in the pan-Indian Varna scheme. The Jains have been involved in commerce since antiquity, and they have provided contemporary India with some of its most powerful corporations and industrialists beside a plethora of smaller firms. But behind the individual businesses lies a substructure of Jain Sanskar, a cultural tradition which embraces religious belief and practices, social observances, and importantly, entrepreneurship. Jains have tended to hold occupations, notably as traders, that are nominally non-violent in intention, if not always in practice. For example, the earliest textile mills in Ahmedabad were owned by Jains, with the potential for the destruction of countless insects and microorganisms as the yam passed through the looms. Economics proved stronger than principles here. As Dundas has noted, Jain industrialists do not speculate on the infringement to the core belief of their faith in their enterprise and manufacturing processes. The rural Digambars of the Deccan, these are mainly agriculturalists, theoretically a proscribed occupation, are no longer stigmatized for violence they cause to organisms in the earth. The Weberian perspective. Weber's understanding of religion is based on his notion of asceticism, which plays an important role in understanding of his concept of religion and the development of capitalism. Weber did not give a proper definition of asceticism, but classified the notion of asceticism into inner worldly asceticism and world rejecting asceticism. Herein he tried to show the path of salvation for various religions and different and dependent on the ethical behavior of the individual as prescribed by the respective religious doctrines. In his classification of the notion of inner worldly asceticism and world rejecting asceticism, he stated that world rejecting asceticism has been the primary essence of religions of Asia, including Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. By rejecting asceticism, he meant that those religions which preaches the essence of rejecting the worldly affairs as worthless, controlling temptations and following the path of penance as a mode to attain salvation. On the other hand, for Weber, Protestantism preached the essence of inner worldly asceticism, which preached the notion of transforming the world by ideals of asceticism and strives to make the world fulfill religious demands. Herein his main aim was to seek the causal relationship between religion and the progress in respective societies dominated by the aforesaid religious doctrines. Weber wanted to have a comparative view of the causal relationship between religion and growth of capitalist ideology. In this regard, he had studied economic ethic of religions. Economic ethics of religions refers to the practical impulses of action which are found on the psychological and pragmatic context of religion. The obvious question pertinent to the role of Jains as successful entrepreneurs is whether they possess some equivalent form of the Protestant ethic, religious principles that foster capitalism. According to Weber, India failed to develop its own form of modern rational capitalism, and India's religions may have been directly and indirectly responsible for the lack of indigenous economic development. While acknowledging the Indian artisans' industriousness and the general acquisitiveness of most Indians in isolation, they could not have initiated modern capitalism. Of the Jains, Weber argues that they shared many of the basic suppositions of the Hindus. They were partly integrated into the caste system and also shared a karma doctrine. He notes that they shared many of the ethical and commercial characteristics of the Protestants, but their behaviors was dominated by ascetic rectitude as opposed to an active asceticism and ritualism. It was these that led to the final confinement to commercial capitalism rather than developing industrial capitalism. A major preoccupation of Jain Banias was with their status as reputable businessmen, which historically has been a byword for Jain integrity, discretion, and frugality. And reputation or abru was an essential prerequisite of creditworthiness. Status was grounded not only on commercial and social criteria, but also, rather than asceticism, on the reputation for religious piety. To a large extent, piety and religious philanthropy were perceived as generating success in business, and there was general acknowledgement that commerce and Jainism alike would only flourish if money was used for religious purpose and be thus transformed into social and spiritual credit. Thus, piety and philanthropy in religion, integrity and a certain caution in business, a self-denying lifestyle, strict vegetarianism, sobriety, and orthodoxy in marital alliances have characterized the Jain business community as conservative. Dundas has argued that these features of Jainism behavior remain intact until comparatively recent colonialism and later independence brought a huge increase in potential and actual trade, which has been exploited by this India's business communities, of which Jains have been one of the most prominent. But as already been noted, the Jains are not an undifferentiated community, and a large section are not involved in commerce at all. A number of those involved in trade, however, particularly in lucrative external markets, have experienced a relative quantum leap in affluence that was earlier only possible for a few major Seths or business magnates. With prosperity and Western contacts have come some changes in business practices, lifestyle, and appropriation of consumer goods as the new markers of status for the new rich. Nonetheless, a variable adherence to an underlying sanskar remains, but is subject, as arguably it always was, to negotiation and the strategies of individual rather than being simply replicated as an ideology. It has often been suggested that the reason the small Jain community wielded and continues to wield so much economic power in India is that the religion it follows, rather like Protestant Christianity, naturally inculcates principles of self-reliance and responsibility which create an appropriate environment for commercial activity. One of the first to make a comparison between Jainism and ascetic Protestantism was Max Weber. He noted that Jainism had a positive relationship to economic motivation, which he saw as quite alien to Hinduism. He noted their severe asceticism, that the individual state of grace in life requires proof through the endurance of hardship and pain. And the laity also observed austerities and undertook special vows that parallel those of the ascetics. Their similarity to Jews, who also adopted trade for ritualistic reasons, is also noted. But what is most striking is Weber's comparison of the Shwetambar Jain merchants with the Puritans. After Ahimsa, the second most important commandment in Jain was limiting their possessions. But it may be noted that the acquisition of considerable wealth was in no way forbidden, only the striving after wealth and the attachment to riches. This was rather similar to ascetic Protestantism. Joy in possessions was the objectionable thing, but not possession or gain in itself. Of their social ethic, Weber notes that the Jains are famous for their charitable institutions and their highly developed mutual solidarity. To be sure, in essence of their solidarity was similar to the functional rationalism of Puritan welfare work, more in nature of discharge of good work rather than expression of religious or a cosmic love of Jainism. Indeed, knows nothing. What is interesting to note is that after having delineated some remarkable affinities between Jainism and Puritanism, Max Weber does not pursue his researches in respect of Jainism and its adherents. His further prognosis and research into Jainism end shortly, although the Jains are cited in the extensive notes of the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. Perhaps it was the paucity of sources available in 1916-17. Weber acknowledges the translation of Guernot, Jacobi, Home, etc., and a text worth treasuring by Mrs. Sinclair, Stevenson, an ethnography of sorts by a Christian missionary in Gujarat. This ethnography for many years was the only non-ideological source on Jainism and has been continually reprinted in India, concluded that the heart of Jainism is empty. With further socio-economic data, Weber may have been able to confirm his intuition that parallels between Jain and certain ascetic Protestant beliefs followed Calvinism were concurrent with parallels in their everyday practices, and to note that Jain's entrepreneurs have been able to exploit ready-made resource groups, comprehensive networks predicated on family, caste, region, and religion. Max Weber was probably inaccurate when he claimed that ritualism excluded Jains from industry. It has been already noted that Jains participated in the emerging textile industry in Ahmedabad in 1870s, although there was initially some opposition within the Jain community. And this change in the economies of scale was not restricted to few enterprising families. By a system of accepting deposits from the public, investment in the industry was widely diffused throughout the upper and middle class people of the city, Jain and Hindu. Another shortcoming of Weber's study is the failure to thoroughly analyze the relationship between Vaishnavism and Hindu Baniya economic behavior. His negative comments on the Vallabhacharya sect, for example, to which many Baniyas of northwest India belong, derive from its perceived emotionalism, orgiasticism, and the preeminence of the Guru. But several commentators, for example, Gillian and Timberg, have argued that there is little or no difference in the economic behavior of Baniyas from differing religious cultures. The Hindu and Jain Baniyas of Gujarat and Rajasthan had a decisive role in the formation of modern capitalism in India and were not impeded in this endeavor by their ritual practices. The concept of trust rule, social and cultural capital, an extension of Weberian perspective. Charles Tilly, in his work Trust and Rule, argues that trust is an integral part of the functioning and cohesion of small groups based on kinship, endogamy, business relationship, etc. Trust is necessary to ensure that everyday transactions together with long-term objectives are kept in mind, and the social codes that become operational in the small community shared by only its members. It is similar to any banking operations. Each of the participating institutions shares certain understandings, and these permit smooth transactions. The Jain Marwadis too have been using such a cultural code that is unique only to their own community. Language, cultural norms, religious obligations, and collective consciousness of the group ensure that each individual actor is aware of the ramification of what each one commits. It means that it is not only the individual but the families and larger kin groups who are held responsible for the acts of commission and omission of the individual actor. This is reminiscent of Coleman's concept of the closure group, which we shall see shortly. Concept of social capital has become very popular since 1990s. The concept, which has its origin in sociology and now integrated into various disciplines, has transcended in the process, leading so far too many definitions, and the process created ambiguity over its theoretical and heuristic usage. Also, there is no widely held consensus on how to measure social capital. The concept is rather used imaginatively to endorse any social, economic, and political phenomena. The novelty and heuristic power of social capital lies in two sources. First, the concept focuses attention on sociability, and second, it assesses how non-monetary forms can be important sources of power and influence. Bourdieu, for instance, formulated the concept while examining particular social phenomena, such as how some people or groups of privilege manage to gain access to powerful positions through their social connections. He was able to demonstrate how social capital can be used to create inequality. Bourdieu was concerned with how oppression and power are reproduced, especially through non-economic means. He engaged in questions of stratification, conflict, seeking to avoid economic reductionism by specifying the contextual specificity of the associated relationships and processes and the necessary creation of the meaning in the corresponding behavior. Bourdieu places the source of social capital not just in social structure but in social relations and connections. For him, social capital entails the aggregate of the actual or potential resources which are linked to possession of a durable network of more or less institutionalized relationship of mutual acquaintance and recognition. His treatment of the concept is instrumental, focusing on the advantages of the possessors of social capital and the deliberate construction of sociability for the purpose of creating this resource. His elaboration of different forms of capital, economic, cultural, symbolic, is aimed at explaining the mechanism of preservation of social stratification system and legitimation of dominant class reproduction strategy. If one were to examine how social networks enabled the Jains to maintain a relatively tightly controlled trust group, it would probably explain how this condition also permitted risk-taking in terms of lending capital. It is no surprise that large monetary transactions take place within this community of Jain Baniyas who employ these trust networks to ensure that their businesses grow. In this instance, the concept of social capital as propounded by Coleman also becomes relevant. Coleman defines social capital as a variety of entities with two elements in common. They all consist of some aspect of social structure and they facilitate certain actions of actors within the structure. That is, social capital is anything that facilitates individual or collective action. He argues that the processes that generate social capital are networks of relationship, reciprocity, trust, and social norms. According to him, social capital is a neutral resource. Coleman identifies several forms of social capital, including levels of trust within a social structure, appropriable social organization norms, sanctions, and information channels. However, his most important contribution was how social capital functions as a strategy to maintain social control. Of particular significance, discussion on closure, which means observance of norms through primordial social ties which entail social control over individuals in the group. Practices in such trust networks generate common value systems and strengthen consensus and compliance-oriented behavior patterns amongst its members. It is through such networks that power can be organized and exercised in the group. To finally conclude, we have seen in this module how Jainism, which is based on the principles of non-violence, which is based on non-vegetarianism, which is based in ahimsa, or an overall philosophy that says that one cannot kill any living thing, has compelled a section of the Indian population who follow Jainism into practicing occupation that would be devoid of any kind of violence. And it is therefore not surprising that most of the business communities of the Marwadis are actually following Jainism. We have also seen how these Jain entrepreneurs, because they are a very small interconnected community, enabled trust relations to develop, which further led to formation of social capital, and finally these trust relations have enabled these small entrepreneur groups to involve taking large risks, especially monetary risks, within their community, and this has enabled to them grow by leaps and bounds.